When the magnificent ocean liner RMS Titanic sank in the icy waters of the North Atlantic in April 1912, the world immediately recognized the human tragedy of the disaster. More than 1,500 lives were lost when the ship struck an iceberg during its maiden voyage. However, beyond the heartbreaking loss of life, the sinking of the Titanic also created an enormous financial disaster that affected companies, passengers, and industries around the world. The Titanic had been one of the most ambitious engineering projects of its time. Built by the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff in Belfast, the ship represented the peak of early 20th century shipbuilding technology. The construction of the Titanic required vast amounts of steel, labor, and resources. At the time of its completion, the ship had cost approximately $7.5 million to build, which would equal hundreds of millions of dollars in modern value. The Titanic was owned and operated by the British shipping company White Star Line, which hoped that the ship would become a symbol of luxury and reliability in transatlantic travel, along with its sister ships. The Titanic was designed to attract wealthy passengers who were willing to pay high prices for luxurious accommodations during the journey between Europe and America. When the Titanic sank, the White Star Line lost one of the most expensive ships it had ever built. The company had invested heavily in the vessel, expecting it to generate large profits over many years of service. Instead, the ship was lost on its very first voyage, creating a devastating financial blow for the company. Insurance played a crucial role in determining how much of the financial loss could be recovered. The Titanic had been insured for a large portion of its value, which helped reduce the economic damage faced by the White Star Line. However, insurance could not cover every cost associated with the disaster. The loss of reputation, legal expenses, and the interruption of future business created additional challenges for the company. The financial impact of the disaster extended far beyond the ship itself. The Titanic had been carrying a large amount of valuable cargo, including mail, luxury goods, and personal belongings of passengers. Some reports suggested that the cargo included expensive jewelry, rare books, and even precious metals. When the ship sank, all of these items disappeared into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Passengers themselves also suffered significant financial losses. Many wealthy travelers had brought valuable possessions with them during the journey. These included jewelry, artwork, clothing, and other expensive items. Because the sinking happened so quickly, most passengers were unable to save their belongings when they boarded lifeboats. The legal consequences of the disaster also created enormous costs. Families of victims filed lawsuits against the White Star Line, seeking compensation for the loss of their loved ones. These legal battles continued for several years and required significant financial resources from the company. One of the most famous legal cases related to the disaster was heard by the United States Supreme Court many years later. The court ultimately limited the financial liability of the White Star Line based on maritime laws that existed at the time. Even so, the company still paid millions of dollars in settlements to victims' families. The Titanic disaster also affected the broader shipping industry. Governments and maritime authorities introduced new safety regulations designed to prevent similar tragedies in the future. These regulations required ships to carry enough lifeboats for every passenger and crew member on board. They also required continuous radio communication so that ships could respond quickly to distress signals. Implementing these new safety measures required shipping companies to spend significant amounts of money, upgrading their vessels and equipment. While these changes improved safety at sea, they also increased the operating costs of the entire maritime industry. The financial impact of the Titanic disaster was therefore felt across many different areas. Shipbuilders, shipping companies, insurance providers, and even governments had to deal with the economic consequences of the tragedy. The loss of the ship itself was only one part of a much larger financial story. Despite the enormous financial losses, the legacy of the Titanic disaster eventually led to positive changes in maritime safety and international cooperation. New agreements between countries helped ensure that ships traveling across the oceans would be better prepared to protect passengers in emergencies. Today, more than a century later, the sinking of the Titanic is remembered not only as a human tragedy, but also as a significant economic event in maritime history. The financial losses associated with the disaster highlight how deeply interconnected industries and societies can be when a major catastrophe occurs. The story of the Titanic reminds us that great technological achievements often come with great risks. When the ship set sail in April 1912, it represented progress, innovation, and luxury. When it sank only days later, it left behind a legacy of loss that included not only lives, but also vast financial consequences. The financial loss after the Titanic tragedy serves as a powerful reminder of the scale of the disaster and the many ways in which it affected the world. From the shipping companies that built and operated the ship to the passengers who lost their possessions, the economic impact of the sinking was enormous. More than a century later, historians and researchers continue to study these financial aspects to better understand how the disaster reshaped the maritime industry. The Titanic may rest at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, but the lessons learned from its loss continue to influence global shipping and safety standards even today.